A lot of praise and hype has gone towards the Cleveland Browns offense, and rightfully so. It is legitimately stacked from a roster standpoint. But less has been said about that defense. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Well, let's talk about it. Now, this defense that the Browns are going to trot out here in 2020 isn't necessarily awful. It definitely has some pieces. I mean, you have a defensive player of the year level anchor in Myles Garrett. You have some former Pro Bowl players in Denzel Ward, Olivier Vernon, and Sheldon Richardson. You also have some blue chip developmental pieces in Grant Delpit and Greedy Williams, also Mac Wilson. So I wouldn't say the cupboards are necessarily bare, but they are certainly lacking. I think there is no real interior presence on this defense. Larry Ogunjobi has just not shown the discipline and the strength to stay on the field as a 3-down interior lineman in an even front. Sheldon Richardson was actually pretty decent last year. Not prime Sheldon Richardson, but good enough. And well, Olivier Vernon was absolutely no help last year, so if he can be a little bit better than that, I guess it's an improvement. You had those problems on top of the fact that the Browns lost their 2 veteran linebackers to free agency, while also getting younger in the secondary with the loss of Demarius Randall. You can easily see where this defense can be torn apart by a great offense like Baltimore. So what are the Browns doing to avoid this? And to understand this, we actually need to talk about the scheme. So when it comes to the type of defense that the Browns are going to run, it's kind of a difficult thing to put your hands on because Joe Woods is going to run the defense, obviously, as a defensive coordinator in 2020. And Joe Woods has been all over the place with all kind of different fronts. He ran a 3-4 in Denver, and he ran a couple of 4-3s in Minnesota and in San Francisco. So this is somebody who has experience with every front imaginable, so you can't just pinpoint him onto a single one. And I know a lot of defensive coordinators, they get the job and they say, well, I don't run just a 4-3 or I don't run just a 3-4, but everybody has their base defense, and he's rotated around those. So he might actually have a legitimate claim to that, but that's not what I think he's going to run. I don't think he's going to run a strict 3-4. I don't think he's going to run a strict 4-3. I think he's going to do what he saw done to a high level in his last stop in San Francisco. I think he's going to run what they run there. And what they run in San Francisco, it's technically a 4-3, but it's really a 4-2-5 if you look at it, because they rarely use the third linebacker. It's normally Quan Alexander and Fred Warner out there with a bunch of DBs. And they also ran zone a lot with that scheme, which makes sense if you're going to do that. Now, I know you hear me say that the Browns are going to run the 49ers defense, and you just heard me complain about the defensive line since the season ended. And I know you're asking me, Quincy, can they actually run that defense? Are they going to be able to do the things that San Francisco was able to do last year with what you would say is a lackluster defensive line? Well, that answer is a little bit complicated. Now, this might be a little bit of a deep cut, but for anybody who has played video games on a PC, this will make a ton of sense. Because if you play a game on PC, you would know that each game has its minimum system requirements, which are the specs needed in order to run this game at a minimum approved level. Some people have extremely expensive, overpowered PCs with 2 graphics cards and 100 gigs of RAM, and they're able to run any game you throw at it at the highest settings with the best graphics and the highest resolution, and they're able to run it with like 300 frames easy with no hiccups. And then you'll find some old dusty computers that you might find in your college's computer lab that run Windows XP still that can't even run that same game with like 10 frames on low. So in the same way that each game has its own unique requirements, it's very similar when it comes to NFL defenses. Some defenses require you to have the highest end stuff possible in order to run it. And some defenses are set up and allow you to get pretty good performance out of pretty mediocre parts. Now, if the Browns are trying to run the 49ers defense, they're not the overpowered, $5,000 PC that the San Francisco defense was last year. But they're not necessarily that dusty computer lab computer. They are more or less kind of a modest mid-range, kind of $1,000 computer. I know this is all a deep cut. Maybe you learned something about computers, but this is the best way I can put it together. And the reason, despite the terrible defensive line, they're able to run this defense or are going to be able to run it is because of their secondary. The Browns secondary, in a very good way, is one of the most overlooked and underrated parts of this entire roster because it has the potential to be very good at the top end and then also has the security of being very deep at the back end. You have starters who are very good and have low floors like Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams, who I think will play even better in their second year in his own scheme. Then in the back, you have Grant Delpit playing the position he was born to play, free safety, where I think he can be special. And then Carl Joseph is a very good fit at strong safety. But the strength in the secondary isn't just the top end, like I mentioned earlier. It's the depth, because you have a guy like Terrence Mitchell, who I think is still one of the most slept-on corners on this roster. You have Andrew Sadejo, who I think is more than capable of starting at free safety if you want to let Grant Delpit roam around a little bit more or cover a tight end or play the slot. Then if you want somebody dedicated to just play that slot corner role, you have Kevin Johnson, who has played that role pretty decently before. So the depth and flexibility of your secondary is what's going to make the Browns' ability to run this defense possible. Of course, and Myles Garrett is always a part of that conversation, but that and Myles Garrett gets you over the hump to be able to actually run this defense. Now, will you be as successful as San Francisco? No, obviously not. This defensive line is nowhere near San Francisco, and there's not an amount of moves available to the Browns to get it to that level. But you do have a secondary that I do think is better than San Francisco's was, that's up to the task to fill in the gaps for the linebackers and the defensive line. Speaking of linebackers, the linebacking situation is completely interesting because the only thing you can say confidently about the entire linebacker room is Mack Wilson. That's the only player you can be confident about. Sione Takitaki didn't really do much last year. I don't know if he's going to be ready for an extended role. I don't think that's what's in his future. BJ Goodson is a journeyman who is not really a lock to be a starter. His best single season in NFL is lower than Mack Wilson's rookie year. And then you have Jacob Phillips, who's a rookie that you drafted in the third round. And this puts the Browns in a very, very bad pickle here because the options available to him at linebacker are just subpar right now. You can have Mack Wilson, a second-year player, be paired up with Jacob Phillips, a first-year player, and then one of those two or Grant Delpit, another rookie, are going to have to call the offense. Are going to have to be the green dot on defense, which means they're going to have to get the play in and get everybody lined up, which is not ideal for a second-year or rookie player to be. Or if you want to go the veteran route, you could put BJ Goodson out there, who isn't really that good. I don't think he's better than Jacob Phillips at this point at all. So you're sacrificing talent for some experience, but is that experience worth it if the level of play is going to drop so dramatically? So essentially, you're going to have a linebacking core that might make a ton of plays, but also might make a ton of mistakes. And in the division, with Lamar Jackson and that Ravens offense that kills people up the seams with bad linebacking play, that's worrisome. Now let's focus a little bit more on Mack Wilson. Who is Mack Wilson? How good is Mack Wilson? I think Mack Wilson's floor is Christian Kirksey. I think he's a better athlete. He's going to develop into a better coverage linebacker, and he's already a dependable tackler and has good instincts like Christian Kirksey. His ceiling, I think, is Fred Warner, so it's not like a huge gap. I don't think he's going to be a superstar linebacker, but I think he's going to be somebody who's very good, and the thing I worry about with Mack Wilson this year is that Fred Warner last year was allowed to blossom because he had a veteran like Quan Alexander to his right to handle those veteran duties. Mack Wilson is going to have to carry the weight of being the main linebacker while also having to do all the extra stuff, and I don't know if that's going to be good for his development. Now, the defensive line, the problems and the solutions available for that defensive line go so deep that that's an entire video for another day. Look for that in your sub box. But the point of this video is to say that, yes, the Browns are going to try to run San Francisco's defense. I think that's the indication coming from the coaches. But I don't think that's going to be the biggest problem that they're going to face. I think they have some room for maneuverability to be able to run that. You do have some concerns with the linebacker, but the secondary is actually pretty good. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think this defense is going to look different in 2020? Or do you think it's going to be a similar kind of 4-2-5 that Steve Wilks ran last year? Let me know your thoughts about what the Browns defense will look like in 2020 down in the comment section below. But again, guys, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, ding that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.